it's Molly, and this is Molly's Flower Shop. Thank you so much for joining me in my kitchen today. This is a once monthly program where you can come into my kitchen with me and learn a little bit about baking. And if you've watched the last several of my episodes, you'll know that I usually focus on desserts and sweets and things that you can kind of bring for a special occasion or put on your table as kind of a centerpiece. But I'm going to change gears a little bit this month. It's January, it's 2020, which is totally crazy. If you're like me, you can't believe it. So this month for January, I was thinking to myself, well, you know, what's a seasonal produce? What's something I can really focus on for January? And I wasn't really coming up with kind of a fruit or vegetable that really spoke to me. So I'm kind of doing something a little different. And I'm actually going to be highlighting maple syrup. So maple syrup is very easy to find. You can go in really any grocery store and find a lot of different kinds of maple syrup. And if you know me, you know that I like to do things as locally as possible. And how lucky for me, I happen to have really good friends who tap their own maple trees right at their house, and they make their own maple syrup. So I am using maple syrup from the Perkins Homestead. Two of my very good friends, Ryan and Sadie Perkins, and with the help of their three wonderful children, George, Winnie, and Louie, they go out there and they do all that hard work themselves. And I'm really excited to use their very special maple syrup that's only about 15 miles away from my house right here. And we're going to put this together into a recipe for scones. So scones aren't really a dessert, and they're not necessarily a sweet. If you're familiar with them, you'll know that they're a traditional British kind of a tea time treat. So a lot of times people will enjoy these pastries with tea time, which here in America, you know, we don't really have that tea time custom. So a lot of us might have not ever even tried a scone before. They're very similar to an American biscuit. So if you think of like biscuits and gravy, they kind of have that idea of a biscuit, but a little bit sweeter, and then usually not enjoyed with anything like gravy on top. A lot of times they'll be served with clotted cream, which is kind of like a whipped cream, like a thick whipped cream, or jam, or maybe dusted with powdered sugar. But like I said, I'm going to be doing a little bit of a winter spin and doing a maple scone. So they're very, very easy. They're very quick to put together. I promise you have everything you need in your fridge and pantry to whip up a quick batch of scones. They take 12 to 15 minutes in a hot oven and you are done. They can be served very fresh and very warm. Put a little butter on top, cut it open, put a little whipped cream or jam like I said, and you're good to go. So let's get right into this. Very, very simple. I'm just going to use one mixing bowl. Everything's going to go right in. I have 2½ cups. This is self-raising flour, so it already has that leavening agent right inside. 2½ cups of self-raising flour, and this has already been sifted. It's important that you sift the flour in this particular recipe because scones are a little bit dense just by nature. So by sifting that flour, you actually kind of lighten everything up and you get a little bit lighter and kind of more height in your recipe. So that's what's in there. Now I have a few different things in this bowl here. This is actually 1 teaspoon of baking powder. So I already have the leavening agents in the self-raising flour, but I also have some baking powder. So you're really going to get a lot of lift from this recipe. And to this, I've also added a pinch of salt, which for me, when I do a pinch, I usually just kind of pour whatever that is right into just the palm when I cut my hand, just the center palm. It's about, I don't know, maybe 1/8 teaspoon, but that's a pinch for me. So I threw a pinch of salt in there. And then also to kind of sweeten up this recipe just a little bit, I've done a tablespoon of sugar. So that's not a lot of sugar. Tablespoon just really isn't a lot when you're talking about this much flour. But it helps to kind of eliminate any floury taste to the recipe, just sweetens it up just a little bit. So I'm going to put that in there. Very, very easy. Next in is going to go butter. So there's not a lot of butter in this recipe actually. It's a really weird amount because it is a British recipe. So it's 1.25 ounces of butter, which comes out to be just about 1/2 stick. So it's cold butter and I've just cubed it. It's very important that it's cold. If your butter's too warm, it'll melt out of your scones and you don't want that. You have to keep your butter very cold. So I just took it out of the fridge. And I'm going to sprinkle it into my flour. I don't like to dump it all in at once because it kind of gets stuck together. So if you note here, I've kind of dotted it through the flour. And I'm going to use a tool that I've used before. This is a pastry cutter. These are very easy to find. You'll find them kind of in different, they look a little bit different depending on the one that you have. This is just a wire pastry cutter. Couple bucks at the store. They're not hard to find, like I said, and they just really help to work to incorporate that flour, which is what I'm doing now. And it's a cutting motion, so I'm just kind of hard to see. But I'm just pushing the butter through the flour. And I want to kind of cut those pieces up into like pea-sized or so. Not too much. If you don't have a pastry cutter, don't worry about it. You can use a couple of big forks and kind of press the butter against the side of the bowl and kind of bring it together that way. You can also use 2 butter knives. I don't like this method so much because I just think it's a little hard. You can take butter knives and kind of cut the butter into the flour that way. Or if you don't have any tools at all, use your good old-fashioned fingers. Just get in there and kind of squeeze the butter and the flour together until it's broken up. I just think the pastry cutter is really easy. Sometimes it gets kind of stuck. Sort of push it through. Okay, I think that's probably pretty good. So the next item I'm going to add, I'm going to put a couple different things in this pitcher here. So I've got 1 cup of whole milk. As you know, I like to use whole fat, full fat dairy products in my baking. When you have like fat-free or skim or 2%, there's a lot of added water and things that kind of change your recipe. So I just like whole fat dairy. And then in goes our special ingredient of the day, which is that beautiful local homemade maple syrup. I'm doing about a 1/4 cup or so. And I'm going to just whisk it all together here. We're going to use this milk maple syrup mixture a couple times throughout this recipe. All right, just a little whisk. And we're going to pour that in. I'm going to save just a tiny bit in the jug. You don't want biscuit or scone recipes to be super wet. Otherwise, they won't come together quite properly. So I'm going to leave just a little bit in here just in case. And then if I need more, I can add more. Certainly can't take it away once it's already in there. You do not need a stand mixer for this at all. I just like to use it because it's so easy. You can just do this with a metal spoon and bring it all together just a couple times around the bowl here. All right, so I just put this around the bowl just a couple times, probably less than 30 seconds. You don't want to spin this too much or mix it too much. Over mixing scones will give you a really kind of a tough texture. And you want it to be really light and really fluffy. So really just when the flour starts to come together, at that point you can stop mixing. I'll just show you what it looks like here. A very, very loose dough. Really not too much incorporation. What I'm going to do, let's kind of gather it up here. And I'm going to just pour it right out of the bowl. Get all that extra flour. And as you can see, I've floured my surface here. Let's get this out of the way. Now, doing a biscuit, you would actually kind of knead it a few times, and you want to knead this as little as possible. So I'm really just barely gathering it up together. Does not have to be perfect here. So it's together enough for me. It really doesn't have to be, you can see these little pieces, that's all right. And I'm just patting it down. You don't even have to roll it out with a rolling pin or anything like that. Usually with biscuits you would. Scones are really even more simple than biscuits, and biscuits are already pretty simple. So I'm just patting it out, a little extra flour here. And I want it to be less than an inch, 2/3 of an inch or so. That looks good to me. And you can do scones 2 different shapes. You can get a pastry cutter, about a 2 to 3 inch pastry cutter, or just a glass. You can cut circles in, and you can have kind of traditional biscuit style scones, or I like it when they're triangular. I think they just look really cool and rustic that way. So I simply take a pizza cutter and cut them into 6. Very, very simple. I'm going to do that in a second, but I have to get my hands clean first. So give me just a second. So like I said, I'm going to do triangular scones. Very simple. You can't mess it up. I do 1 cut across, 1 this way, and 1 that way. So you've got yourself kind of a pizza type of a deal. And then we are going to simply get this out of your way. Gently, gently lift them right onto your baking sheet. Now, this is just your regular old cookie sheet, and I've done a silicone pat. If you don't have one of these, parchment paper is perfectly fine. These are just reusable, kind of nice. Just saves on parchment paper. Now I'm just transferring them onto that Silpat in that same shape. As you can notice here, I've separated them out just a little bit. Gives them a little room to grow and space out. And I'm going to do just one more thing. I'm going to add a couple ingredients here, and both of these steps I'm about to do are completely optional. So since I have that extra milk and maple syrup mixed together, I'm going to brush that over the top. This is going to keep the scones nice and moist, but then it's also going to give them kind of a nice color. And the milk wash is something that you would traditionally see with a biscuit, so it's not unheard of, but you don't have to do it this way. I just figure I've got the extra anyway, and that maple syrup is going to give it just that really nice golden color as it bakes. Little added flavor and moisture. Scones are by nature a little dry, and sometimes that can be off-putting to people, but they are meant to be enjoyed with tea, so it usually works pretty well. And then I'm going to do one more thing that make them kind of a little extra special, is I'm using something called, it's got 2 different names, Demerara sugar or turbinado sugar. It's a really coarse brown sugar. It stands up very, very well to heat. If you go to like a coffee shop or a bakery and you get professionally baked muffins, sometimes they have like that granular sugar on top. That's usually what this is. So I'm going to just sprinkle a little over the top. It's going to really bring out that maple flavor because it has that kind of deep caramel kind of idea to it. So that's just going to help that maple flavor along. And like I said, the sugar stands up really well to heat, so it doesn't dissolve. You don't really run the risk of it burning, which sugar on top, usually you'd have to be really, really careful about it, but this is a really sturdy sugar. So it's great for a little bit of extra decoration. So there's that. Done. Easy, right? Everything in one bowl. We barely mixed it together, patted it out a little, and cut it into triangles, or you could do scone circles if you wanted to. I'm going to pop this into a 425-degree oven. It's a very hot oven, and you need that really high heat to hit it so that leavening agent works and they can really puff up and pop. So let's pop these in 12 to 15 minutes, 425 degrees. So the scones are in the oven, a quick 12 to maybe 15 minutes in a hot oven. And while they're baking, I'm going to make an icing. So icings are super easy. I've done them on the show before. We're going to start with just powdered sugar. That's about a cup or so of powdered sugar. And you can tailor this part of the recipe to kind of suit your needs. If you like a little bit more icing and you want to do like a whole glaze over the top of the scones, you can make a little bit more. If you want just like a little drizzle on the top, kind of ribbons of icing, you make a little less. It's totally up to you. But it's very simple. So like I said, I've got about a cup or so of powdered sugar. And then I'm bringing back that milk and maple syrup combination. I still had some left over from the main part of the recipe. So I'm actually going to pour this in, and I'm going to mix it up and kind of check the texture of it, because I want it to be sort of a spreadable icing. And that's the nice thing about icings is if it's a little too loose, add a little bit more sugar. If you've got too much sugar, throw in a little bit extra liquid. Super easy. I think I'm going to add just a little bit more sugar to kind of thicken this up a little bit, but I definitely want you to taste the maple, so I might play with these flavors really quick. So let me go grab my sugar. Some people say less is more, but I just don't believe in that. All right, I threw in probably an extra 1/4 cup or so. That's looking better. Yeah, that's good. So that is my icing. I've gotten it to ribbon stage, which means as soon as it comes off the whisk, you can still kind of see the impression as it drips off. And normally when I do a recipe that I'm going to frost or ice afterwards, I always tell you to make sure that you cool everything completely, because if you put this icing on anything that's kind of warm, it's going to kind of spread and ooze everywhere. And usually that's not what you want. You want kind of clean lines, but for scones, you want to eat them warm and fresh, pretty much right out of the oven. So for this recipe, and this is the only one I can think of off the top of my head, I'm going to tell you that it's okay to ice them when they're pretty fresh out of the oven. So I just have a few minutes left in the oven. We're going to glaze them right away, and then I'm going to add another kind of a special local ingredient. So if you're familiar with the Spice House, which is on Old World 3rd Street there in Milwaukee, this was a Christmas gift from my Aunt Michelle, and I'm really excited to use this as kind of an extra little dusting on top of our scones, and then they'll be done, and then it's time for brunch. Okay, everyone, so the scones have come out of the oven. Aren't they beautiful? They have that just very nice light golden color. You'll see my cat running around in my kitchen right now. Very nice light golden color. You don't want to overdo it on scones. You want them to just be barely golden brown, not too dark. And you can see that demerara sugar just kind of glistening. So very pretty. Kind of makes them look a little special. And like I said, I've just gotten these out of the oven, so they're quite warm, but I'm going to ice them anyway, and they'll actually kind of just be like a glaze, because the heat from the scones will actually melt the icing a little bit, which in this case is okay, because we want them to be, it's almost kind of like a cinnamon roll thing where the scones are warm, the frosting's warm. That's something you frost right away when you take it out. Cinnamon rolls. It's kind of the same idea. And if you wanted to, you could just pour this over top so you have kind of more of a glaze than the lines I'm doing. It's up to you. Okay, that looks pretty good to me. And last but not least, I'm going to use that maple sugar I was talking about before. Like I said, this was a Christmas gift from my Aunt Michelle. She knows I love to bake, so she wanted to kind of get me something special to bake with. And what better to use this maple sugar from Milwaukee than on maple scones. Just a little bit of extra flavor. And that's it. That's maple scones from Molly's Flower Shop. Couldn't be easier. You have everything you need to make basic scones, and then you can add in pretty much whatever else you want to make different kinds. These, of course, are maple, made from maple syrup from just 15 miles away at my very good friend Ryan and Sadie's homestead, the Perkins Homestead. So thank you to them for providing me with such a delicious ingredient to celebrate here in January. I hope you have the time to go out and make these delicious scones and enjoy them either for tea time or maybe a brunch. If you have any questions for me, I'm very easy to find. I'm online at mollysflowershop.com. You can send me an email, mollysflowershop@gmail.com. I'm on Facebook and Instagram with that same handle. And of course, I'm always on JATV, Charter Channel 994, or on YouTube. Thank you for joining me here at Molly's Flower Shop, and I'll see you next month. Remember, life's short. Eat the cookie.